Okay, we're now live. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June 29th, 2020 CCSD59 special meeting of the Board of Education. I'll now turn the meeting over to Board President Janice Krinsky to begin the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. We need to have somebody act as secretary until Patty is able to join us. Is there someone that is willing to act as secretary?
I can do it, Janice.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab a written implement. All right. Okay, so do we want to do roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay, Ms. Krinsky,
Present.
Mr. Reed,
Present.
Mr. Garlowitz. Not yet. Ms. Lang, present. Mr. Mancia,
Present.
Ms. Petrielli just joined us.
I did.
All right,
Hello.
why don't you finish taking the roll call, Courtney, and then she can take over.
Will do. And Ms. Schumacher. Oh, Mardell is on mute.
We just must, all right, now I'm present.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, then Patty, you'll take over then, now that we've taken the roll call.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I have received 2 comments that I will read. The first one came in from Nicole Hang. And here we go. Dear CCSD 59 Board of Education and Administrative Team. First off, I would like to thank you for your hard work and dedication to our students, families, and community members during these trying times, and for prioritizing the health and safety of not only our students and families, but also the communities that surround us. I would like to endorse a hybrid, remote, and in-person schedule for the fall. A hybrid schedule would accomplish several of our shared goals. 1, decrease person-to-person contact, limiting the viral load in school. 2, ensure that the school remains in full session all year long by decreasing the chances of an outbreak. 3, provide excellent instructional opportunities for students who cannot or will not attend school. And 4, enable targeted community-based instructional environments. 5, address the skills inherent in address the risks inherent to full capacity busing. A hybrid schedule with options for at-home learning will allow parents who must or choose to keep their students at home to do so while enhancing our capacity for remote learning and maximizing the time our schools can go without an outbreak. Thank you, Nicole Hain. Okay. And the second one came in from Michelle Notini, and it says as follows. I appreciate this opportunity to address the Board of Education during these most trying times. These comments were intended to be presented at the last board meeting, but since it was a collaborative effort, they were not ready in time. We hope the messages conveyed here regarding students' connection to their school and partnering with parents are considered as you continue to make important decisions during this difficult time. On behalf of a group of class of 2020 parents, the following comes from a place of caring concern and a true interest in working together to make things better. As parents, we are on the front line seeing what this world situation has done to our children. For a district that encourages social emotional well-being and partnering with parents, it fell short in regards to recognizing the class of 2020. Many students did not feel the district supported them as a graduating class. This surely was not the intention, but perception is reality. Kids need support, connection, and recognition, especially during these times. We know and understand that safety was a concern while determining graduation plans, but there had to be a way for students to gain closure and maintain a connection to their school. While other districts had drive-by celebrations with their teachers and families, our graduates and fifth graders had materials and belongings put in their cars. The virtual graduation and dance was appreciated, but not enough. Having all three schools together for the dance made it more of a disconnect than a celebration. Students wanted to celebrate with their school. The Friendship PTO offered to recruit our regular DJ for the event early on, but was told the decision had already been made. The graduation ceremony was better, but without much feeling or emotion compared to other video productions the district creates. Students did receive a class of 2020 t-shirt in the mail. The PTO contributed towards the cost. There was no note of acknowledgement, simply a shirt in a bag on the doorstep. Also, parents had to plead with the principal to receive their graduation gowns prior to the virtual ceremony. The PTO at Friendship worked very hard to try and provide a school connection and support for the graduates, as they should. They created a gift for students to commemorate their junior high and future high school. The gifts were hand-delivered by parents to all graduates. The PTO also designed a class of 2020 banner that was placed at street level by the school. The PTO paid for what it could, but since these items were not budgeted, most of the gift was paid for by a few parents personally. Several parents reached out to the school and district for financial support out of existing budgets and were refused. Parents were happy to step up, but it should have been a collaborative effort to support our students. The partnership between the district, principal, teachers, and parents to always work together in the best interests of students should be a priority for the district and evident to all. Ideally, the district will help support a plan, if possible, for an outdoor celebration for our class of 2020, where social distancing and all other safety guidelines can be followed, and which will be organized in collaboration with parents and students. Okay, I'm gonna just check and make sure no more came in. And seeing none, let's move on to presentations.
Good evening, everyone. So, excuse me one second. So tonight is a structure that through board discussion, I know that Randy was one of the board members that initially suggested that, but the full board supported the opportunity of adding more meetings throughout the course of the school year. That would be typically they're called a committee of the whole meeting, where we could pick one or two topics and then spend more time going in depth, having discussion, building an understanding. The board also talked about the opportunity for interest-based topics that the general public may have in mind or have of interest. So this new format adds, I believe, not counting this meeting, for committee of the whole meetings to the board agenda for next school year. Having said that, tonight's meeting will focus on, it's kind of a three-tier approach, all connected to strategic planning. The first part will be just a quick summary and overview or review of the strategic plan and the strategic plan process. The majority of the board members actually served on the plan team. I think.
Excuse me, Art, is everybody else hearing that? I'm getting a lot of breakup and I can't understand you.
Mine is clear.
Is it just me? No, it's Courtney too. Mardell?
I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it.
Yeah, I'm fine with that breakup.
Oh, it must be just me. All right, never mind. Go ahead. I'm gonna mute my video.
Okay, let me start over. Just kidding.
Sorry.
Having said that, we had 5 of the current board members who were part of the team. I believe that Robert and Courtney were the only 2 not able to participate. Robert was not on the board at the time, and I know Courtney has a full-time job, so it's very challenging for everyone to be part of it. But that said, I know that all of our board members have a pretty good understanding of the strategic plan, so I don't plan to spend a lot of time on that. The second element of the presentation will focus on the most pressing and immediate needs for planning. So we will discuss the strategic plan in the context of reentry planning. During that portion of the presentation, we do want to provide the board with an update. As you know, last week, the State Board of Education released their joint guidance for Phase 4 instruction, which has a strong emphasis on in-person instruction. So the document, as you guys have seen, is about 60 pages, and there have been a number of webinars, follow-ups, FAQs in response to that. And some of the information is still evolving and changing. So we've had an opportunity to meet with our plan teams and look through the guidance. And we'd like to share updates. If you recall, in early June, I believe it was the June 11th meeting, we shared our phase or the part 2 phase 3 guidance with the Board of Education and introduced the structure that we are utilizing to plan for reentry later in the summer and fall. So that'll be the second segment. And then the third segment will return back to the strategic plan and start talking about the very specific areas of focus that we'll be working on post reentry of the school year. So, we're thinking there's going to be some type of a 4 to 6 week transition once the school year begins of looking at learning loss, transitioning from last school year's learnings and things that students may have missed, assessing that, and then moving into the new school year. At that point, we want to, switch our full focus back to the implementation of the strategic plan, which we spent much of last school year with, a large group of 75 people, including community members, board members, administrators, and staff working out a strategic plan. So that's a nutshell of the presentation for tonight. The next steps following that then will be at the July 13th meeting. We plan to bring a recommendation to the board for reentry. And then we also would like to narrow the scope of the focus areas of the strategic plan and bring back recommendations to the board based on our discussion and conversations tonight. And then any subsequent conversations we'll have in the next 2 to 3 weeks in terms of recommendations for focus areas for next school year. So that's a layout of the presentation and the next steps. Are there any questions from the board members? Randy?
Randy, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I muted myself. I kind of envision this as like an open discussion, and I'm just wondering how we want to handle it since this is kind of our first one. Do we want to set guidelines from the perspective of, if we have a question, do we ask it right away, or do we wait? Should we wait till the end, or how do we want to do that?
That's a great question. So for the first part, it's basically a review of the strategic plan. So if I can move through the slides rather quickly, that would be my preference. For the next 2 parts, we'll have a discussion per each slide. So as we're working through that content, we'll have opportunity to discuss as we move through it. But again, since the first part, Randy, is mostly a review, if you could hold those questions till the. All right, so starting out with our mission statement, as I indicated earlier, many of you were involved with the strategic plan process last year. We used an outside firm called the CEC, which is the Consortium for Educational Change. It is a national organization, and they do many strategic plan processes, both locally and around the country. We had a great facilitator, and it was a very, I think, inclusive process, a very collaborative process. In the end, though, our goal was to have mission, vision, and then goals and sub-goals that represent, what we believe, what we think is most important to our community. The board was very explicit that we wanted to have a large community sector involved in this process. So it's not a District 59 plan, it's a community, it's a consolidated plan. And we had lots of voice, lots of opportunity for feedback. And we met over the course of the first semester in several different settings with very specific themes. Anyone interested in more information, you can go to our website, and there is a link to our strategic plan process that walks through every meeting, has all of the minutes, and you can get a very full picture of how that process played out just by viewing that resource. So our mission statement remained the same: preparing students to be successful for life. And really, we use that statement, that mission, to really guide what we're trying to do to get kids to be successful for life. It's a time in our country's history. It's a time that, as we know, is unprecedented. So preparing kids to be problem solvers, kids who have the skills necessary to be self-directed learners and apply the skill, knowledge, and content they learn in school is more critical than ever. So this mission drives that approach. Our vision, we made some pretty significant changes based on committee recommendations for our vision. And you can see the 6 statements there that make up the district's vision. And this really directs where we're headed. We have 4 goal areas and sub-strategies. Again, in the final part of the presentation, we'll go into some detail and have much more specific conversation about how we've prioritized this work based on feedback from a lot of internal and external groups, including the Board of Education. So our first goal is related to student growth and achievement. And then those are the goal strategies listed below. Our second goal is related to the learning environment. Goal 3 is family and community partnerships. And goal 4 is stewardship of resources. And this was an interesting goal, only that originally we had 5 goals and we combined resources, both financial and human, into a 4th goal, understanding that this work is very significant and will be built out through our plan teams as we implement the strategic plan. So that leads us to really what the most specific work, the most immediate work, most pressing work is that we're addressing right now, and that is reentry. And then also, what are those very specific elements of the strategic plan that we want to thread through our reentry planning? So as I shared at the last board meeting, we've developed 4 large umbrella areas for reentry planning. So health, wellness and safety, instruction, operations, and communications. In terms of looking for priorities, in phase 4, our goal is in-person instruction as safely as possible. It's critical to us that we keep students, staff, and families safe in any plan that we roll out. And tonight we'll walk through 3 different scenarios and talk a little bit about our planning for each scenario so that we can be prepared regardless of what phase that we're in, and regardless of what the needs of our staff, students, and parents may be during any of these phases. And then here are a few of the other priorities that we've developed. A few of these we've taken from some other plans that we thought were very good and were similar to what we had discussed, but caring for the school's social, emotional, mental health needs of students and staff, maintaining coherent learning by creating a scope of standards and learning aligned systems of assessments, whether we're learning in person, virtual, or physically distanced. This includes equity and access for all students, which is a significant topic of all of our conversations. We're continually asking the question, is this safe and is this equitable for all of our students and families? A priority is also meeting the needs of students by considering the unique experiences of students and by considering students' families as active partners in learning. Designing flexibility into schedules, built environments, protocols, and norms for being together in person, physically distanced, or through virtual learning. And lastly, engaging and connecting with students, staff, and families with clear communication and planning. So these are the updated scenarios. The first and third are pretty close to the same as I presented at the last board meeting. But if you look at return to in-person instruction, this is a change. So this is aligned to the phase 4 of the Restore Illinois plan. In this scenario, schools reopen for instruction. This requires the use of appropriate personal protective PPE, including face coverings. And again, that an important distinction that the state has made is that it's a face covering versus a face mask only. So it could be a shield, could be a mask. Another one of the musts is prohibits more than 50 individuals from gathering in one space. The state has clarified that a space could be a bus, it could be a classroom, it could be a gymnasium, but 50 individuals is the max. Requires social distancing to be observed as much as possible. Again, that word is used significantly throughout the guidance and also in the webinar that I listened to when asked the question, well, you know, if you've got 25 or 30 kids in a classroom, how can you socially distance? And the response was, you social distance as much as possible. So they recognize that there are times when that may not happen if a school system chooses to go in that direction. The next requirement is that requires schools to conduct system screenings and temperature checks or require that individuals self-certify that they are free of symptoms before entering school buildings. This, as you can imagine, this statement is causing a lot of controversy, consternation, and discussion around the state in terms of how this will work. And then lastly, requires an increase of school-wide cleaning and disinfection. We'll get into much detail and discussion about these shortly. I'm sure that you probably already have questions, but we will get into them. I do want to acknowledge that in May, we launched a reentry plan team committee that came up with some of the initial recommendations that then emerged to the 4-committee system or 4-plan team committee that we have put in place now. So you can see the names of those individuals who were part of that team, and they've shared some recommendations. I did share this with the full board at our last board meeting. Again, this is our planning and organizational structure. So at this point, we have an oversight team that's made up of the superintendent's leadership team and then Ann Wang, who is the DEA president. We meet every Wednesday to talk about our progress and then also come to final decisions for any of the recommendations based from the plan teams. Tom has a very unique but important role. Tom is the process manager. So Tom oversees and actually attends a number of the different plan team meetings so that we can work efficiently, avoid redundancy, and then have a coherent communication in place among the team. So that's a really significant role that Tom is playing among all of the plan teams. And then Ben Gray will head the communications team. And again, these teams have been meeting for weeks now and have done a significant amount of work, and we'll be sharing that shortly. The instruction team is led by Maureen McAbee. Maureen's not able to join us tonight. The operations team is headed by Ross Vittori and our new CSBO, Ron O'Connor. And then the health and wellness committee is facilitated and led by Dr. Katie Ossel. I've asked Tom to talk through his role, and then he'll launch the start of the reports for reentry planning. 1 second.
Thank you, Dr. Fessler. So, as Dr. Fessler spoke to, my main role is to help us align, coordinate, and connect this work. As you can see from the planning team overview, we have close to 40 staff members involved in these different planning teams and trying to coordinate and connect this work. Obviously is a priority. Probably the biggest piece I bring from being able to attend all the different sessions, or at least most of them, is to highlight things that seem to be jumping out across all of the different planning teams. Even today, as part of the instruction piece, they invited a group of new staff just to get some feedback, and a few things popped out that then I attended the operations committee and was able to share with the group. Another big piece of my role is then to try to take all of this information and get it in one place where we can access it as a group. As you can imagine, the agendas, the resources, the guidance documents, the feedback we're collecting, feedback from attorneys, thinking about training scenarios, trying to get that in one place so we can all access. And I do have to say, from attending these sessions, our staff are just doing an outstanding job. Very purposeful, very thoughtful, back to that piece that Dr. Fessler spoke to, we want to get kids back, but the safest way possible. It continues to come out. Staff bring that perspective and ask great questions, and really just trying to make sure we're on track to hit these targets. As Dr. Fessler mentioned, we're looking at the 13th of July to recommend our overall plan. But much work has occurred up to this point, to the point that we're making recommendations to the leadership team, the oversight team, and making decisions about PPE, personal protective equipment, about potential structures to the instructional day, resources, and just things across the board. And I'm able to just coordinate and connect some of that work for the group so that we don't have all these leaders attending all these meetings. Instead, they're focused on doing this key work right now. As we look at these different pieces, can we go back to the timeline piece, please, Dr. Fessler? I think it's one back. There we go. Thank you very much. So this is just a timeline we've put together as we've gone through this process. As Dr. Fessler mentioned, it really kicked off with Maureen Maccabee pulling together that initial committee to start to get some ideas of the work and the focus from that, these 4 different groups, health, wellness, and safety, operations, instruction, of course, and then communications came from that. Also, as Dr. Fessler mentioned, just last week, we received guidance from ISBE, and I appreciated him pointing out, those different components to the plan. You must do face coverings. We highly encourage you to do social distancing as best as possible. We limit the amount of essential items shared with kids, just lots of different pieces of either must do, should do, have to do types of pieces. There was a follow-up webinar the next day and then an FAQ that came out after that. It's been interesting that some of the guidance has changed through that 3 different pieces of communication, and we are expecting that to continue to happen. As we spoke to on the 13th, we'll bring an overall plan. All the committees, planning teams, I should say, are working towards an individual plan. We'll merge those into one plan for the group and know that that plan will be a broad plan that we'll continue to work on over the course of July and even into August. And then we'll focus on the training piece for staff, for kids, potentially for parents, and then implement those plans as we move forward. And that takes us to the planning team overview. Again, these are the 4 planning teams, and we were actually utilizing somewhat the structure that we learned about through the strategic planning process that CEC outlined to us, of having some very leadership groups, subcommittees, and specific work within those pieces so you can really maximize the work of staff and get lots of stakeholders involved in the process. So we have these 4 pieces. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Katie Ossel, and she'll speak to the health, wellness, and safety slide.
Thank you very much, Tom. So as you see, we have a very robust health, wellness, and safety group. Up until now, we've been meeting 1 to 2 times per week with a core group, the first 4 people there, and really staying on top of the guidance as it comes out. So as Tom mentioned, we had guidance on Tuesday, then a webinar, then question and answer documents, then legal guidance. And so each day there's a new iteration of that work. And it's our job to make sure that we are on top of that, engaged in reading and reviewing, and then figuring out how we translate that into practice in our schools so that we are bringing back our staff and our students in the absolute safest way possible. So our key priorities in that work have been planning for personal protective equipment. So different staff need different items. We're looking at masks for our staff members, as well as goggles for certain people, face shields for certain people, and different options for anyone who may have a medical reason to have something else, to make sure that we have all of the right items in the right places so that we can best prepare our staff and students and make those initial purchases. So that is a key priority because of the timing of this. We want to make sure that we have everything here when needed for our staff and students. Along the same lines, we are looking closely at our spaces. So we want to maintain physical distancing when possible, to the greatest extent possible. And so we're looking at how we can best utilize each space in each school to do that, and support health needs as well. So what spaces our nurses will use to support students with medical needs. Screening and entry, as Dr. Fessler mentioned, has been something that has changed in the guidance just over the last week. So we are reviewing how to best screen our students and staff upon entry and make sure that if people are ill or exhibiting symptoms, that they are taking care of themselves in the most appropriate way and not entering our buildings. And with all of that, we know, I'm sorry.
So what are some of the things that, like, the procedures? I mean, do we have to scan and every student coming in every day, every staff member? Or is it more, kind of self-regulate? I mean,
Right.
we could spend 3 hours just, testing all the kids as they're coming into school, right?
Yes, it could be a massive undertaking, absolutely. What the guidance says right now is that we need to screen every student or staff member, or they would self-certify that they are not experiencing symptoms. The thing that we are awaiting is what that self-certification process truly looks like. If we have staff members or students who say fill out a form that they certify that they do not have these symptoms and they do not have a temperature, then how are we reviewing that information, and can we review it in time to actually do anything with it if there is a concern? And so that is what I think is being discussed at the state level. How does that logistically happen in schools in a way that doesn't require mass amounts of manpower to do so and time to do so? Because we want people to be safe, but we also want to maximize our instructional time.
Katie, let me jump in real quick.
Sure.
I also want to mention that I meet 2 times a week with about 16 local school districts. So all of the 214 feeders, and then 2 or 3 other school districts surrounding us. We meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays because we really believe that it's important that we're collaborative in whatever solution we all develop, because we know that we've got teachers whose kids attend neighboring school districts that live in our communities and vice versa. So whatever we decide or other school districts decide could impact our staff. So we've been trying to be collaborative and really stick to sharing ideas, sharing strategies. So that conversation right now is leaning toward the self-certification piece. We have concerns with liabilities, so we're talking with our attorneys. There are a couple of areas in here that will be likely coming back to the board to talk about some type of either board policy or administrative procedure to support the implementation of these things. And again, that's based on not only the recommendations of the State Board of Education, but also our legal team. So I can say that based on my conversations from other local schools, they feel the same way, that to try to do the temperature checks at the door, even if we used every entrance we have, for the number of students we have, especially if you think of one of our junior high buildings that has over 1,000 kids, that would take a lot of time to do that. So the conversation has really focused on the self-certification. We need to do a lot more investigation on that to make sure that we can do that. During the webinar, the state, though, referenced a possibility of an app. So they've not shared out more details about that. So we're waiting to hear a little bit more about the possibility of using an app for that certification too. Thank you. Katie, go ahead.
Oh, Katie, before you jump in, I have a question too. Do we know, for instance, if the schools will be allowed to, if for example, a student self-certifies, I feel fine. He comes into the school, he has some signs that he may not be 100%. Whether or not the school can point a digital thermometer at him to take his temperature without, or does the student have to consent to that? Or are we going to get
under the
trouble?
guidelines? We can scan for temperatures, so we're absolutely able to do that. I think if we end up in a place where we are scanning temperatures, we would want to make some very clear guidelines as to why we would scan temperatures, for whom and at what time. So is it all students? Is it rotating for certain students on certain days and a check here and there because we're also self-certifying? So there's a lot of different ways that could look, but yes, we absolutely can scan for temperature.
or even is there a process for, the students as they enter the building, if one student does have a temperature unknowingly, the risk of other students seeing that, possibly teasing the student, those types of, now you're putting that student in a position where everybody knows they're sick.
Yes. So that actually brings us to the very next point, which is staff and student training. So not only do we need training in just what are the procedures, but we need to make sure that we are teaching students about the context of those procedures. And that, if someone did have a temperature and they needed to go to this room and see the nurse, and we needed to do some further screening or ask questions, that is not cause to make fun of that child, that could happen to anyone. And the reason we're doing that is to protect everybody's health and well-being. And so my belief is that if we educate people up front about those things, that we will have less and less of those situations. And certainly if we do have one, we'll respond to that as we would any other situation of kids, really being disrespectful to each other.
But Katie, sometimes people are asymptomatic, so they don't show, but they can also be carriers. So, there's a lot that we have to deal with that I'm wondering, how are we going to prevent, especially when you can have, it's up to the class, if they have 30 kids in the classroom or whatever, how are they going to deal with that type of situation?
Those are additional plans that we are creating. So if we have students, if we determine that someone is symptomatic, then of course we would have procedures for how we reallocate space. If we close down that classroom, if we go remote. So one of the big things that we have in the guidance is that we really need to be ready to move from in-person instruction back to remote instruction quickly. Because if we do have a confirmed case, then of course we want to do deep cleaning, take a break from that space to make sure that we can clean appropriately and get everybody moved as quickly as possible so we don't have any more spread of symptoms. And so that is all part of the procedures that we are creating and how we would use different health spaces in the building.
Hey, Patty, also just to add to that, the guidance is actually very clear about exposure and what that means. So if we have a classroom that is exposed, we would then make plans for remote learning for that group of kids. So if they have to be out of school for the 12 to 14 days, we would make sure that we would have a remote learning plan for kids, any students during that time.
And I'm sure you guys have already addressed this, but no, I've lost my train of thought. Sorry, I'll come back to you. Can't remember what I was going to ask.
Kind of going on your point about, let's say if a kid gets in a classroom and the classroom has to go to remote learning, what are you going to do about the siblings of that? We have, because we have a lot of students with siblings. Because I have that question. I have a question about lunch too, and
Sure.
then we took some thought about lunch. But that's I'll say that.
I have a lot of thoughts about lunch too. So if we had siblings in class, so basically the answer is that we're going to follow the guidelines from IDPH. So when we have a confirmed case, the Illinois Department of Public Health assists us in who needs to do what, and then we help the Department of Public Health communicate those things to the family. So they're going to provide direction at that time as to this is what that child needs to do, this is what the siblings of that child need to do, the parents of that child, this is what the classroom the child was in needs to do, and they really work us through that process with us, and we help them communicate out and get in contact with the right people.
And the teachers don't travel, right? Or the teachers do travel? Is it because especially in the junior high, do the kids all stay in one classroom and the teachers from the different subjects go place to place? What is the procedure?
As much as possible, teachers should move, students should stay put.
Okay.
So Katie, a question about sort of the gray areas, because I feel like when we take a temperature, we at least have some kind of objective numeric value we can point to. But I'm thinking of the teacher who feels uncomfortable because she has a student in class with a runny nose who's coughing. And I guess I'm wondering what the teacher's resources would be, because I would think that might be a student that we'd like ideally to be tested. Do we have the resources to test? Do we have to get consent to test? Like, just all of those gray areas where we start to have staff or employees that are feeling uncomfortable.
So we have always, had an informal process of screening for symptoms, right? If a teacher sees a student is struggling and thinks that they may be sick, they contact their school nurse and they say, can you come take a look, or can I send so and so down to you to do some additional screening? And that was with or without COVID. That would be the same at this point. If our teacher is concerned for the health and well-being of a child, then they would be contacting the office so that we can figure out how to best support that child. The point for the temperature is 100.4 degrees. But we also know that on really hot days, and if kids have been on the bus, they might come in at 100.4 degrees. And when they're in the AC for 3 minutes, that'll change. So we also have to think about being reasonable with these guidelines, and then what are the next steps. So yes, I think in that case, we are planning for, we're not there yet, but there's on our list of things to do is to really help staff understand what their role is and what their role is not when it comes to students and observing symptoms. Because we also don't want to be in a position where teachers are feeling like it is their job to identify if kids are sick or not. That's not their job. Their job is to care for kids, to notice things that are different, and to report them for further assistance if needed. So that's something that I plan with our committee to really spell out for teachers so that they have some clear guidelines and know what the expectations are and are not for recognizing symptoms.
Katie, this is Janice. I thought when I read the latest advisory from ISBE that they listed all those symptoms and said any children with any of those symptoms should be staying home. If they have a runny nose, they should be staying home. If they have a sore throat, if they have a headache. So hopefully kids already aren't coming to school. I just wanted to clarify that it isn't just the temperature that they're looking at.
Yes, there's many things. There's temperatures and there's symptom screenings. And so with that self-certification plan, if that is the part that comes to fruition, we would be messaging loud and clear and repetitively that these are the symptoms. No one should be coming to school if they have any of those symptoms. There's already lots of communication tools out there that we would get out to parents. And under that additional priorities column, you see family and community engagement and reentry, because we really need to partner with our parents so that we all have a very clear understanding of what it is that we're looking out for and how we maintain the health and safety of everybody by making sure that our children are where they need to be, whether that's at home or at school based on their symptoms.
And Janice, I would think that if there is an app developed, I would assume it would have a checklist of those things listed, and parents would have to check off that their students are not exhibiting any of these symptoms, and then hit submit to certify.
So we are also looking into students that may be immunocompromised, staff that may be immunocompromised, our students that have 504 and health plans, and our nurses at the beginning of every year communicate with teachers about student health plans and any implications that has for the classroom. This year it will look a little bit different because we'll be talking about students who have health plans and what that means for them for in-person instruction. And will they have a more individualized plan for in-person instruction or remote instruction, how much of each and why, based on health needs. We are also, breaking out so that those plan team members are breaking out into 4 different subgroups. One of them is specifically focused on social emotional learning and classroom climate and how we establish healthy and positive relationships if we're in a remote environment, and healthy and positive relationships coming back from being in a remote environment to in-person instruction. So they are focusing in on those things so that we can support teachers with plans, ideas, concepts, lessons that help them reestablish classroom climate in any environment. And a group that is specifically focused on social justice and anti-racism actions. So along with the coronavirus pandemic, we have many, many students who are affected by the racial injustices that are occurring in our world, by racial violence. And so we know that for the well-being of our students, this is something that needs to be addressed and we need to take action in. Not to say that we haven't. This is something that Student Services and Assessment has been working on for years and years. Just in the last 2 years, establishing the Social Justice and Equity Committee and making sure that we're moving forward with our actions with that committee. But we know we need to make it bigger and broader. And so that group will start meeting in July to start planning out what that looks like. So those are some of the additional priorities. There's a whole lot more that goes on this list, but I think that gives an idea of what it is that we're working on right now, primarily.
I promise. And I'll go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, thank you, because I think what you're working on here, it's a mountain that you have to kind of plan for, and there's so many unknowns and so many little steps in between each major point that we're trying to get to. But I think you make a good point of, we need everyone's involvement here. We need the parents' involvement here. They got to be on top of things just as much as our teachers do, because the teachers not only have to teach under these types of conditions, but now they are possibly temperature checking, keeping eyes on symptoms. We haven't even gotten to the cleaning part of things, and I'm sure they're going to have to do some of that as well. So now they're taking on more and more and more. So we need everybody to kind of help out to kind of even out those responsibilities.
Thank you, Katie. One thing I didn't see on the list was, visitors into the school. I know we have, mailman coming in, maybe a copy room repair guy. Are we going to have a separate set of procedures that they're going to go through as well?
So our visitors, so first we're going to limit visitors as much as possible. If it's not essential, we're going to ask that we do that virtually, right? We can still hold virtual meetings and figure those things out. So I think the first step to that is limiting non-essential visitors. The essential visitors will have similar screening procedures as they come in the building. So as ISB works through that and we receive more and more guidance and the superintendents work together to determine what that will be, that will give us an idea then of what that needs to look like with visitors as well as students and staff entering the building. So it could be also, we just purchased hand sanitizing stations for all of the buildings. So it could look like before you come in, sanitize your hands, then we're going to take your temperature, then you can come into the office with your mask on. Or it may look different, but based on that guidance, we'll determine what that visitor procedure looks like as well.
Okay, any more questions for Dr. Ossel? I do appreciate the mountain analogy. As we've been going through this work, I do feel we're climbing 4 separate mountains so we can climb Mount Everest as a group, because it is quite complex. And every little piece has multiple pieces under it. But again, the groups are doing a great job. And honestly, we are focusing all of our energies around these pieces. So with Maureen not here tonight, I'm gonna help out with the instructional piece and guide us through that piece. Dr. Robinson's going to join me on Wednesday. She'll officially be the Executive Director of Curriculum Instruction. So she's been participating on the instruction committee throughout. So she'll jump in to help and provide additional support to respond to questions. So in a similar way as health, wellness, and safety, we have a very robust group of staff, district and building, elementary and junior high, staff members, administrators, really providing different perspectives and feedback as we go through the process. As we look at the key priorities, this group is really focused on the essential target piece. And the best way I can describe that is streamlining the curriculum and bringing that essential target piece down to those key essential skills, foundational skills, application skills. So as we come back, whether we're in any phase, we're very, very focused along those paths. Additionally, they're looking at the scope and sequence and looking to adjust and again, streamline that piece. So as we dig into what we're expecting from the learning and teaching side of things, that process is very focused as we move through the year, especially in this first 4 to 6 weeks. And as we move on from that piece, again, in whatever phase we're in, the complexity for instruction though is essential targets if we're fully in session, partially in session, or working remotely. And that does create some complexity. We're very fortunate that my own personal belief, we rocked this spring from March to the end of the year, jumped right into a great structure. So we have a great base of things to work off of, and these groups are doing really well with that. Additionally, as they look at scenarios, we're talking about the daily and weekly schedules that flow across our different systems. Patty spoke to the junior high. Our structure is kids have a 9-period day and move from one class to another throughout the day. And while we're trying to, I know there are discussions around managing that structure and limiting student movement, it's also difficult to do across a school like Grove with 1,000 kids and different types of classes during the course of the day. So they're actually talking about how do you limit that movement maybe through schedule adjustments, less classes each day, and they're looking at many different things. Today's session really broke into elementary and junior highs to get different sets of feedback from even a larger group. They added another 20 people to the committee today to get some real down to the classroom feedback and questions from staff. And then that last piece of the key parts is the assessment piece on the, especially tied to those essential targets. You know, we're talking about what data and information do we need to give teachers at the onset of the school year that'll best help them plan instruction for their kids, which will likely cause us for things to look different than it has in the past. Very fortunate, I think I spoke to this at the last meeting, the iReady piece has a diagnostic assessment that kids can take digitally that can give us some very specific information about where those kids are today and help plan instruction around that piece. Nicole, would you like to add anything on the key priority piece?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to the scope and sequence adjustments, just to let you know that what we're looking at are what were the targets, what were the learning targets that should have been taught in person in the spring, and then making adjustments to our fall instruction to meet those needs. So for instance, in math, some of those learning targets that were not met in the spring, we would need to pick up and put in place in the fall, because math progresses and you have to learn one thing before you can move on to the next. But for instance, in writing, where it's a spiraling curriculum and you're going to come back to a certain piece of writing throughout the year, we might just make adjustments to that as it comes up later in the school year. So we're looking at that adjustment across all subject areas and grade levels. And, you know, the essential, developing and identifying those essential targets and then putting together the scope and sequence that is narrow and focused and really helps us all target in on what's the most important thing that students need to be able to do. We're also making sure to have consistency. So that's across classrooms and across schools so that our students and teachers are all having a consistent experience. Those items are also what you'll see when we go into the strategic plan discussion. So they're very aligned. What we're doing right now for reentry is also what we'll be continuing to do after reentry when we focus on the strategic plan elements.
Any questions on the key priorities before we discuss the additional? Randy?
So I was looking at the plan members, the team members. I see a junior high teacher and I see a elementary school teacher. Are those the only two teacher representatives on the team for instruction?
On this, I believe on this key kind of big picture over large group committee, today the additional people they invited, I believe almost were exclusively elementary and junior high staff members.
Okay, so you're definitely going to get some feedback from the teachers, what they think is going to work and stuff like that, because they're the ones that are going to be doing it, and they'll have probably the best ideas.
So just to, you know, we had another slide that listed subcommittees, but it just got too cumbersome. So our structure is these are the plan team members, and from that, each one of these people may have their own subcommittee. So like when we get down to the operations, Albert is on the plan team, but he may have a subcommittee made up of custodians and other workers that really focus on some very specific things. So these people were picked basically for their area of expertise, and they might lead other subcommittees. So as Tom said, you know, we just added 20 people to the instruction team. You know, the total number of people involved in this is significantly higher than just this list that you're seeing for the plan team.
Could I ask a question, Tom?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My major concern is picking these children up at the place where they are and being able to move forward. And that's going to be really tough. And Nicole mentioned it. Is there any possibility that we could use the summer session to work with the children who have not been doing what they should have been doing during the spring and are definitely behind because they're going to need some extra help? And so I was thinking possibly that. Also, my question is, are these children going to go back to the teacher that they had in the spring, or are they moving on to different teachers, particularly in the elementary and middle grades? Because it's very possible that we should have them come back to their old teachers for at least 3 or 4 weeks until they can determine where they are and what should be done with them, so to speak, because the new teacher would have no clue really about where they are.
I'll speak to both as best I can. On the summer side, I know we expanded our summer learning opportunities and had a number of kids and families take advantage of that process in alignment with the goal to keep learning going or to make up some ground. But part of our reality is when kids left, that's the last really set of information and data we had on those kids. So we couldn't say, well, we should invite Nicole because she's so far behind. We don't know where Nicole's at today, but we did expand those opportunities specifically to keep learning going throughout the summer and have a number of sessions going on right now. In regards to the fall, I know there was some discussions and there's some recommendations from the state about the idea of looping. I think you would define it as looping. I keep my same kids into the new school year. I don't believe as any schools or school district that we're going down that path. Part of the reality is we have a whole new set of kids coming into the school year. In kindergarten, kids are moving up through the system. And I think a big piece of feedback was, in this context, to then ask a teacher to, well, finish 4th grade and now learn 5th grade curriculum and scope and sequence on the fly, in a sense, to implement would be potentially very difficult. I think Nicole spoke to, as we're working on these essential targets and the scope and sequence, to focus on what we miss from the spring and include that in the fall or this new grade level learning and move things forward. Nicole, does it align with the work of the committee?
Yes, it does. And we did talk a little bit about having some kind of closure with the previous teacher, Mardell. There are some, we've had teachers retire, they're moved or whatever, so we couldn't do that full scale. But there will be plans at the schools to provide some sort of closure and move on to the next grade level with the next teacher. In terms of, how do we determine where the kids are? That's why our focus on assessment is a diagnostic rather than our typical benchmark assessment. We want to know where these kids are right away so that we can provide them the support that they need wherever they are along the continuum.
That's good, because I think that's probably the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
That flows nicely into the additional priorities. When we talk about platform and resources, that's been a major focus. Again, we're lucky that we made the decision to move to the iReady platform back in the spring, and that was adopted in March and really aligns with this idea of a diagnostic assessment that provides a learning path for kids that they can use to practice in school or at home. That's a huge part of our thinking back then, and just is so fortunate as we move forward in this process. I know we're also investigating the literacy side of that, what options are out there that would in a similar way provide some diagnostic assessment data that would then put kids into a learning path. Those are my words. There's probably better words to do that, but the whole goal is to keep this guaranteed and viable curriculum moving, whether we're in session, whether we're at home, or we have some sort of mix. And there are some resources out there that will allow us to do that in a much more efficient way than maybe where we were in the spring. Nicole, you can probably add a lot of good stuff to that.
Yeah, we are piloting a resource in summer school right now that our teachers are providing us with some feedback in regards to an ELA or reading platform, but also within that we're talking about what kind of training our staff and students would need to implement these new resources. So we don't want to to overwhelm anyone with 10 different new things. So what is really necessary? What do we need? What do our kids need? And what can our teachers provide? And then how do we give them the training that they need? And part of that is with the reentry, a focus on in the beginning, at that beginning transition, a focus on, of course, SEL, and then making sure that students feel comfortable with whatever those platforms will be in the event that we go remote right away or remote down the line, so that everyone has a seamless transition rather than what we experienced in the spring were some hiccups in that area.
And those other pieces, some changes from the spring, but in the spring grading was really paused. Kids couldn't lose ground. So it looked very different, whereas the guidance has really stated grading should follow as it has in the past, whether you're in any of those different phases. Attendance in the spring, we didn't have to take attendance in the standard sense of it, but we were shifted to, as we go back, no matter what situation we're in, attendance will be required every day. And then a big part of the planning discussions that's happening now and will continue to happen is if we're in some sort of hybrid or remote or different situations, there are special populations, IEP students, EL students, tier 3 students who, the recommendations are really focusing on how do you get those kids to school if you're limited in who you can bring in, because especially on the IEP side, that's required, basically a legal document, and most of that instruction is in person to best meet their needs. So how do you plan around those pieces? So that's all factored in, along with a whole nother mountain of things to go with that. Any questions, additional questions for instruction?
So just a couple things then, Tom. So you're probably asking, what does the model look like? Again, I want to emphasize that our goal is to try to align with the phase 4 guidance in every manner. So as safely as we can, we want to bring back as many students and as many parents as possible. And for those who are not able to come back for whatever the reason, whether it's the model that we use or the scenario or the structure that we use, we want to try to have a solution that provides synchronous learning. So whether you're in school or out of school, we want kids to have a guaranteed and viable experience in learning. So the platforms and resources become critical. I know that, Nicole mentioned that we don't want to overwhelm people, but most of the platforms that we're looking at are mastery based. So they help not only identify where any learning gaps may exist, but they provide instruction where kids are currently performing. So Tom, I thought your word learning path was absolute perfect word. And these are self-directed platforms. So it doesn't require the teacher to be instructing the kids. The platforms actually instruct. So this will be a great opportunity for either at-home practice, or if we're in a remote practice outside instructional time. So kids can actually get real-time instruction and practice. And the term that many of these companies use is acceleration. So they can accelerate their learning through their practice and therefore address some of the gaps. Tom already mentioned the diagnostic piece of this. This gives us real-time data about students' performance against standards and skills that we can put into our MIDAS system and have comprehensive student reports that we can share with our teachers, our principals, and our Board of Education and the broader community.
It sounds like you've got an awful lot of work that you've already accomplished, which is good.
It's really a tremendous amount of work. I appreciate that. With that, I think if we're ready, we'll move on to operations and turn it over to Ross Vittori.
Good evening, everyone. To reiterate what Dr. Fessler said, our goal is always to have in-person instruction with everyone as safe as possible. Of course, our conditions now are very different. So it's been very easy for our 4 committees to circle around the why, but it's the many different variations of the how that keep shifting and changing course. The operations committee is a really good example of this. I'm going to take you back to the health, wellness, and safety bullet, number 1, PPE, plan, and initial purpose. So after that committee is coming to those types of decisions, whether that's an option A or B or C, then that kicks into the operations committee, where we have people on our team figuring out what is the best price, what's the best way to get these materials, not just initially, but throughout the year. As you know, there is a huge need for these items, and they're not necessarily easy to get, although they are getting easier with each coming day. We're also seeing the government, ISBE, start to open up other options for us, whether that's making the bid process a bit easier if we use certain vendors. We can even get free materials from some of these organizations. So the operations team looks to instruction, looks to health and wellness to say, okay, what work have you done? And now what do we need to do? Their second bullet of repurposing spaces. So what would that look like? If we need multiple spaces to act as a nursing station, then what spaces in each building are ideal? Where does that furniture go? What would our crew need to know in advance, and so on? So there's a bit of half of our work on operations is some of that behind the scenes stuff. The other half are those daily pieces that really are a huge undertaking in a typical school year, but now have that twist of hybrid learning to it or in person in these conditions. That's like meals and busing. So we're getting quotes, we're running scenarios about how many buses do we have, how many would we need if we ran with less than 50 people for all kids back, what time would we have to start? If we did that, could we still get meals to students who are at home and couldn't come to school? So we're running all of these different scenarios as we continue to dig through the work so that we are ready to go. Some things that we thought would be really challenging are actually seeming to work out pretty easily. Meals, for instance, we can do boxed meals for breakfast and lunch. And as you know, we've already delivered, I think, 200,000 some meals. So we've got that pretty well figured out. So that isn't really at the top of operations list because we've already done a lot of work there. Getting some of the materials, the cleaning and disinfection, Albert and his team, they've been looking into that all summer. They weren't waiting for the guidance to see, okay, what kind of products are we going to need? So we've got a bit of a head start. But when we do get to some of the more specific, like the physical safety, our second bullet, which says like screens and signage, that's where we're looking at different options. And then we're getting really creative. The screens means like those barriers that you'll see in front of like a checkout. So our crew has already developed and designed and built, I think, 3 or 5 of these. You may have seen them at the Ad Center for our language screening and for our front desk, because we have been open running essential business. So just today, the committee received word from Albert's team that we won't need to go and buy those from a vendor. We can make those because we have advance notice, we can get the materials, and we can outfit our offices. The other nice thing is if there is a different need that comes up, we can take care of it. The same is true for some of the signage. There are tons of vendors out there for signs, and there are also free resources for signs, but we think that we might be able to utilize some of our staff and build the signage within, which will allow us to have better access to translating it for both Spanish and Polish, but also to make sure that we have ready access if it needs to change or if signage gets damaged. So we're looking at all of those tiny kind of behind the scenes, but equally important pieces, and still collaborating with the other committees. Now the secondary items, some of them I believe have been mentioned here and there. We're also looking into the realities of different types of insurance, waivers. We are looking into the potential need for supporting staff at a different level. What does that look like if a staff member can't come? What does that look like if a staff member can come? But as we said, what is that? What's the instructional piece of it? Is it remote? Is it in person? Is it both? Can we divide up staff so that we're not overloading our teams? So we're starting to look at those too. And right now, the building admin reps and wing, they've been a tremendous help in that area. And that part's just starting now. So we feel like we're in a pretty good place. There's still a lot of work to do. And there is a lot of, we need to wait and see what that next piece is so that we can go ahead with ours. But we've got a few of those options queued up and ready to go.
Hey, Ross, I have a quick question. Or actually 2. Is the district, I know I saw in that email from the governor about he had recommended using a centralized vendor to maximize the purchasing power? Is that where we're going with, or has that been exhausted?
We are looking into multiple vendors. Yeah, and some of that by using their identified vendors, it also frees us from the bidding process depending on how big the order is. We've entertained different size orders from, if there really is going to be a difficulty getting these items, let's get them all. We'll eventually need them. Two, maybe we need a variety of different kinds, which is where we're landing at the moment. We need some disposable, we need some cloth, we need some face shields. We're hearing some different needs from our association leadership, so we're adjusting some of our initial plans to support that. And now in terms of some of the PPEs, we're also noticing just from the committee members on a personal level who have said, listen, I ordered a mask for my child. It was child size. It didn't even come close to fitting. It kept falling off. So there are also some times where we're pumping the brakes a little bit and saying, let's reach out to our vendors and say, can we get some samples? Before we buy 100,000 units, let's make sure they're going to fit. Let's make sure they're going to be comfortable as much as possible, because we want to hit that why of that working. And then there's a whole other piece of that too, in terms of most of us aren't used to wearing some of the PPEs for as long as what this school day might look like. So how do we build that piece in? So we are absolutely looking at all those resources. As Tom said, we've got a couple other documents internally that are just lists of links, but he's organized them in a very nice way. And we keep getting, more people reaching out to us each day as well.
And the purchase of PPE is for staff and students, right? Or is it staff only?
Staff and students, correct.
And visitors. Interestingly, 6 weeks ago, we couldn't get any of this stuff, and now we probably get 10 emails a day from different people who are now producing and providing estimates. So it really has gotten very, very competitive. So we used to work with a state vendors association or a conglomeration to get better pricing, but it's really getting competitive. So we have a series of different solutions. I think one thing Katie did not mention that I thought was pretty cool is just the whole conversation about, for our teachers, providing a teacher care kit. So here's a mask, here's a shield, here's some hand sanitizer. So every teacher would have that and have some flexibility. We also want to look at options for our students, because I know I've received several emails already from parents concerned about kids wearing masks all day. And, they're sharing research that refutes and talks about some of the challenges that kids will have with that, both mentally and physically. So we want to be certain that we have some choice solutions, but it was also important for us to wait for the guidance before we spent $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 on these different materials, and that's just PPE. That doesn't even get into the cleaning materials and all the other costs of cost increases associated with COVID.
We also recognize that.
Janice, I just wanted to make a comment that I think it might make sense to suggest to parents that kids practice mask wearing at home so that they've got some experience with it. And it was a suggestion that was actually made on one of the Facebook feeds.
Yeah,
So perhaps it could be mentioned in an email to communication to parents.
Well, absolutely. And just two responsive points to that. One is, we know that some families, staff, students, they're going to bring their own masks, and that is absolutely appropriate. We just want to make sure we have enough and a variety for the different needs. And Janice, you're speaking directly in alignment with the piece that Katie mentioned about training, right? So that right now it's this initial exploration of our needs, getting set for a few different options based on what's presented to us. Then we have the plan, and then we have to communicate that out, and we have to train people. Absolutely.
Yep.
And the state has also indicated that they're going to provide one cloth mask for every student in the state of Illinois. So we've already applied to receive our share of those cloth masks too, in addition to what we will purchase for cloth and disposable and face masks.
And as Mrs. Lang pointed out, I mean, these are students. You could have a student with that runny nose, or a student who coughs, and we're not going to be calling home saying you need to bring your backup mask. We want to be ready for as many scenarios as we can predict.
Thank you, Russ.
I have a question, Ross. Have we gotten, and this may be more for Katie, have we got any sort of guidance related to like the specials and like gym classes and stuff like that? I know the state mandates certain classes, we provide gym a certain number of days a week, this type of thing. Have they changed those guidelines at all related to that stuff?
I haven't seen anything related to a change in requirements. I think the state's been very clear across everything. All the requirements are in place. How you meet those requirements might look very different. Actually, in the guidance document, they speak to physical education in, go outside as much as you can, or don't have your kids change into gym clothes anymore so they don't go in the locker room. So they've provided a lot of suggestions along that path, but have been very clear. The expectations remain intact.
Okay. So because I was like, because I know if we're going to try and do like box lunches for these kids and stuff like that, we could theoretically multitask the multi-purpose room for a bigger classroom kind of thing. But if we need to use that for something like a gym class, then using the gym for a classroom isn't ideal.
Absolutely, and it brings up the great point of the pieces we can't control. I think the real feels 99 with thunderstorms the next 2 weeks. So, all of these play, the outdoors needs to be a space we can capture as much as possible, not only for PE, for wellness, for social distancing with mask breaks. These are all the conversations that we're having. But if we have to utilize multiple spaces to make lunch happen in groups 50 or less, which is an even harder trick because to eat, you need to have your mask off. So we really need to make sure that 6 feet is there as opposed to when possible in other times. If we need 4 classrooms for nursing needs, Randy, as well as anyone, we've got different size buildings and some of those pieces are going to get tricky. But that's why we have that one additional priority on operations of the facilities accommodations. We're even looking at, teachers who are going to understandably say, can I get into my room extra early? I want to get the bean bags out, or we need to move some of the furniture to open up space. Those are all those details we're starting to approach.
Could I just comment on what I did with my husband over the last 10 years as far as sanitizing? And I think it's very difficult because when he was able to come out of the car into the house and go to the bathroom and actually wash his hands, we were in good shape. When he was no longer able to do that and he had to just come in and go right directly to his chair, he had a container with wipies or whatever you want to call them, sanitary napkins to wipe his hands. That's not as good as soap and water. And there are 2 different kinds. He had a container that was good for wiping the furniture and so forth, not for the skin. And then another container that was just for the skin. But the one for the skin doesn't work nearly as well as soap and water. And obviously he got an infection. So I think we should start right now trying to train our parents to teach their children how to wash their hands with soap and water. And believe me, I know it's tough because I used to do it before there was COVID with my kids when they were growing up, and kids don't necessarily like to do it, but there's nothing better than soap and water, truly.
And we are even exploring details on our committee in regards to the difference between a hand dryer in the restroom and towel in terms of spraying water and items throughout. We have also seen a product that can retrofit a current water fountain, which we would need to close anyway, unless it has the bottle filler, that's okay, but it can retrofit a water fountain to be a hand washing station. So Mardell, we are looking at maximizing the opportunities to wash with soap and water and then have those other pieces like the gel for the times when it's not accessible, but not to replace it.
Good. I think that's smart.
Okay, I think we can move on to communication and Ben Gray.
Thanks, Tom. So yeah, as you have heard, there is and are a lot of elements throughout all of these. A lot of decisions are being made really on a daily basis. So one of our challenges is, how do we keep everyone connected? How do we keep internal audiences connected with that, groups knowing what other groups are doing, decisions that are made? As Dr. Fessler mentioned, we have our Wednesday meetings, but there are spaces in between those meetings where things may happen that will impact other committee groups. So we're working to update what kind of those practices are, make sure everyone stays updated on those, and then external as well. As you have seen, we've committed over the summer to a bi-weekly communication, but we also will do that additionally as needed. We just sent a communication on Friday, but we're going to send out in the near future a family survey to get their input, family and staff survey to get their input as well. So sometimes the need presents itself where we need to communicate more frequently than every other week. And we know as the plan and as decisions are finalized, we will need to update things such as what Jenna shared, where we're sharing the training and updating families on practices that we want them to be practicing prior to reentry. One of the pieces that we're looking at is a virtual presentation for staff and families in July, as we shared Friday. That will be taking place following the upcoming 4th of July holiday. And we will have that feedback from staff and families as well. And then we're looking at how do we present our final plan. So if you've seen ISB's 60-page document, what can we present that gives our audiences, our staff, and our families the necessary detail that they need to understand a lot of the questions that you all have posed? But we also want to present an overview document that doesn't weigh people down by 60 pages of information. So we're looking at two different pieces, kind of a high-level summary of here are the decisions, here's what you need to know. And then for those folks who want to really dig in and get the details, we also want to make sure we have that available for people to be able to reference and look at and read through. So that's the path that we're continuing on. We're also continuing to look at what are additional ideas and suggestions that we would have from families and what they need to hear about and how they want to hear from those. We continue to utilize all of our social media feed, our news feed, the email, obviously, and we'll continue to expand those pieces out as we move forward. So any questions about communication?
Yeah, hey Ben, this is Robert. Are there any plans for surveys as we go back to school, schedules for releasing surveys, getting feedback from parents that way?
Yeah, so we have we're working on a survey right now. If you mean a survey, I guess elaborate a little more on that. What kind of survey were you asking about?
Similar to what we did with the start of remote learning, just something that can go out to all the parents in the community to kind of get their impressions and comments as to how everything's going.
So when we start the plan, yes, that's something that would be part of our feedback loop from parents. We're also currently working on a survey that each of these groups, these planning groups, are compiling questions that they would like to know input on from families about their perspective, the scenarios, the different concepts of what is feasible or preferable from families, and the key data that the groups need to inform some of their decision making. So we absolutely plan to have multiple surveys. The most immediate one, obviously, wouldn't be, as you referenced, it wouldn't necessarily be a how are things going because we're in the middle of the plans, but once we implement, getting the feedback would be absolutely important and critical.
Great, thank you.
Before we go on, I would really like to thank everyone, and I'm sure I'm speaking for the rest of the board to say we are very grateful for your leadership and your commitment and working through all these many, many issues, and way more than you even touched on here today, to move the district ahead in the best and safest way possible while still focusing on educating our kids. And it's been a heavy lift, and I am very, very grateful for the leadership and the contributions of everybody who's been involved.
Thank you, Janice. Just to close out this section. So you've heard a bunch of information, great questions, by the way, thank you. But just want to leave you with some of the challenges that we're experiencing. First of all, our first challenge was getting the guidance last week. So, we're patiently waiting for that. But again, we've got school starting in July and August. So for us, that information was very helpful. I think one of the biggest surprises for us was 50 in a space. Prior to that, we were not thinking that we could get 50 kids or 20, even 20 kids. We've done some capacity studies, and there's no way we could, using social distance, get, much less 12 kids in a classroom, spreading desks out 6 feet apart, not to mention buses. So when the state shared guidance that you could have 50 kids on a bus or a space could be a classroom, that was a big surprise for us. But then that also causes a challenge, because our goal really is that we want our kids back, but we want our staff back, but we want them back, and we want to have a plan that's safe. So that presents a challenge for us to weigh that guidance and then make sure that we have a safe solution. I think another thing that was a surprise to us was the guidance for self-certification for temperature checks. Originally, it was every adult coming into the building would have to have a temperature check. Now, to go to a self-certification, that's a game changer, but also that presents some potential safety concerns for us and potential liabilities. Same thing with the masks and the shields. To say that you could now wear either a mask or a shield, I think that was a little bit of a surprise to us as well. All that said, now we need to look for guidance from our legal teams to make sure that the district and the liability is not so significant that we can't do these things. So that has created a little more work that we'll need to address in the upcoming literally days. Transportation, again, is a piece that we need to figure out. Again, if we want the most amount of kids to attend school, we bus 4,500 of our 6,700 kids. So that's a lot of kids on a bus. So we need to really work through that with our transportation company. And as we collect feedback from parents, we want to make sure that we're getting some input there in terms of parents thinking that they may just drive their kids to school. Well, any of you who have dropped off kids at school, you know that it's already a little crazy in the morning and after school for pickup and drop off. So that could result in some other congestion issues that we would have to work through. The other pieces that are really important are training. And many of you guys have mentioned not just training our staff, but also training our custodians, training our parents, training our students. Those are also elements that are significant to address in our planning in preparation for the reopening of schools. We also have to order a number of things, whether it's our washing stations, we're looking at devices, platforms, synchronous solutions. All those things, again, are now going into effect as we plan these next couple of weeks. And Robert, you asked about the survey. We absolutely plan to provide some surveys. Actually, we're going to launch a series of surveys this week and try to get some immediate feedback from our parents based on our plan team's needs, as Ben indicated. But we want to use that feedback to help direct some of the plans and decisions that we'll present to the board at the July 13th meeting. So that initial feedback will really be about directing the current work and some of the questions that we have right now that we need answers. And we'll do something very similar with staff as well, because we have a number of questions for our staff as well connected to the reentry of school. So that's just a summary, and then some of the challenges that we'll be addressing in the next couple of weeks in preparation for bringing a recommendation to the full board for reentry on July 13th. Having heard all that, any other questions?
I'll ask one. So we've gotten this guidance. This guidance is set in stone. It's not going to be changing like everything else has been changing over time.
I expect it to change. I expect some pushback in some of these areas, Randy, and I do think that there'll be some ebbs and flows with the guidance. I'm really curious to see particularly what they do, with that classroom space, if they get any pushback on that. But I think Tom mentioned this in his remarks earlier, just from the time they released the information last week to this week, we've already seen a few tweaks and updates and clarification in the guidance.
And you may have answered this already, but if parents are they're really concerned and would rather have their child do learning remotely, is that up to them, or is there something that ISB has set.
I
they
do
will
believe there's flexibility in the guidance. You know, as we plan out, you know, our final structure for reentry, we want to make sure that we can meet the needs of all of our families and all of our staff. So we do want to try to have a synchronous solution. So if parents are saying, you know, I'm not going to send my kids, or they're a vulnerable situation, or we have staff that may have vulnerable conditions, we want to make sure that we have options to address the needs of our staff and of our students. So we've not ironed out exactly what that looks like, except that we want to have an equitable, guaranteed experience for kids, whether they're in person, whether they're fully remote, or in a hybrid. So I think we have all those details kind of coming together, but that is the outcome, to provide a synchronous solution no matter where the student is at.
Actually, as a follow-up to Patty's question, so let's say a family does decide, hey, I'm not going to let my kid come to school because of, you know, health concerns or family concerns or whatever. Are we going to have that, try and identify that beforehand so we can properly plan? Or is like, oh, hey, this, you know, all of a sudden, hey, if day one, we're expecting these people to be here, and there's
that'll be the follow-up email that I think Ben was alluding to in his comments, and that we want to make sure that we're fully prepared and even have a way to manage attendance for that piece. Now, there are some issues that, you know, we need to work through in terms of if that's just, you know, a live stream, or if there is some type of a recorded option. But we are in talks and will continue to be in collaboration with our teacher leadership team, with the DEA, just to make sure that we're addressing those conversations together, because those pieces, you know, there are some ripple effects and ramifications and some comfort levels that we have to address with how we provide those services. But we fully intend to be able to provide those services. And Randy, yes, we want to make sure that we have knowledge of what people are doing before the school year starts. Asking some tough questions tonight.
It's a tough subject.
It really is. And again, to Randy's initial question, you know, is the guidance going to change? If it does, you know, we'll update the board with the changes and any changes in our planning. And then Ben will also include those in any community communications as well. All right, so transitioning now back to really a focus on implementing the strategic plan post reentry. So this may look familiar to you all. Again, we've used a similar format in our reentry planning, but we have, again, instead of a planning team, it's called a goal champion, and these are the folks who oversee the particular goal. And then we'll have plan teams and then subcommittees. And this really represents those 4 areas of the strategic plan. And literally, I think the week before school closure, we were setting up our teams and getting ready to do the specific work for the launch of the strategic plan. So once we, again, get through the reentry planning, we'll revisit this structure and begin to implement the areas of the strategic plan. But before we do that, we would like to we want to prioritize the areas within the strategic plan goals and talk about what we think is or are the most important priorities to address. And this is an important part of the discussion, board members. We really want to hear your feedback here so that after this discussion, we can come back to the July 13th meeting and say, based on all the information, the data that we've collected, these will be our 4 primary areas of focus from the new strategic plan. And then these will be our secondary areas of focus. So similar, again, to what you saw above, we've got our most immediate areas of work, and then we have our secondary areas of work. So, you know, the difference really is where we're emphasizing training, the amount of work with our teachers, with our coaches, with our leadership team to achieve these things. The secondary work, some of it may be social emotional learning, which you guys know we have a long history of working with SEL. So we may not need as much training or emphasis on these things, but there's still important work that we're going to be working on, just as an example. So in this next section, we're going to work through the 4 goal areas and talk about really the feedback that we've got from our administrative leadership team, feedback that we have received through and from the Board of Education, just more anecdotally with our conversations about the strategic plan. And again, our goal is to talk about the priorities, get some board questions and board feedback in preparation for the July 13th meeting, where we'll bring back what we think these are how we're prioritizing the work for next year. Does that make sense? All right.
Yeah, so Art, if you could stay here for just a second as we jump, we jump into the goal one, you could see those high level multi-year strategies. So there are 4 really big picture, and I think that important piece, I have to remind myself, the strategic plan is a 5-year plan. So as we move towards implementation and full deployment, these are things we'll work on over the course of 5 years. So next slide, please. Thank you. As we talked about goal 1, student growth and achievement, as Dr. Fessler mentioned, we spent some time when we had it in late February, early March, to talk about pressing needs within those key high-level strategies. And through that feedback really came up with these 4 components. I think as Dr. Robinson mentioned earlier, the fortunate part is these are very aligned with all the work we're focused on in the reentry piece too. So from a goal 1 standard, we're kind of lucky we're doubling up here and kind of doing work together, even though we're looking at some deeper pieces following reopening. So Nicole's going to walk through a couple of the more instructionally focused pieces, and then I'll speak to the assessment ones.
Yeah, so thanks. So following our reentry, we will continue refining and expanding the development of our learning targets. That's across all subject areas and all grade levels. So just as we're doing for our reentry, we're going to do that across the board. This relates directly to our curriculum clarity, making sure that we know exactly in each area at each grade level what students should know and be able to do, and then how to put that in place. So that will require professional learning for our teachers and our building administrators in implementing those things. But the key here is consistency and guaranteed and viable curriculum that is throughout our system. In item B there, we're also focusing in on our math instruction and professional practice within math instruction, increasing student growth and learning through the implementation of a flexible model flexible structure at each school that would maximize personnel and provide small strategy group instruction for our students based on those skills that they need to know within the math curriculum, aligning resources to that and formatively assessing students along the way.
Nicole, this is Courtney. I just had a question related to the learning targets. Mm-hmm. Would you explain to us, because I feel like I'm sort of missing the big picture of what's already in place related to learning targets and what areas, grade levels still need to be done. And if you could guide us through the process of prioritizing those and the order of the workflow, that'd just be helpful for my understanding.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. I will tell you that as I've been transitioning, I have not attended every single meeting, and Maureen would be able to speak in more detail about every specific detail here, but I'll give you an overview. So in terms of learning targets for mathematics, we have our learning targets identified at every grade level for every learning experience. What we're doing for that, though, is narrowing the focus to what are the few key essential learning targets in each for each learning experience, and then how do we track student mastery along that continuum. So in math, we've got a good start, and we're going to keep rolling in that. For literacy, at each grade level, our learning experiences do include all of the essential standards. What we need to do is take the standards from the reading and writing standards and tease those out into student-friendly learning targets so that teachers can narrow that focus. So for instance, one reading standard might be much more difficult than just that one sentence, right? So there might be several targets within the standard once you unpack that. And that's the work that's being done currently and will continue to be done. So for literacy, we're just narrowing that focus and really making explicit what the standard means in those student-friendly learning targets. And then science and social studies. I know our facilitator has been focusing more in the junior high for this year in providing, looking through the curriculum there. And so our goal is to identify those key learning targets K-5 this year, while they're already being developed and identified, have already been identified at the junior high, and then creating those assessments linked to those targets. So that's the information that I have, having not been involved in all of those meetings with the facilitators yet.
Hey, Courtney, one other thing. Again, I think it's important to repeat that, the additional platforms, the iReady and the STEM scopes and some of the, whatever we land on with ELA, again, those will be more independent based practice opportunities for kids that identifies their mastery level of a particular standard and then guides them through and provides directed instruction. And again, it's an acceleration model. So they not only can address the gap, but continue to get up to grade level or whatever the goal might be. So again, I think those are going to be powerful tools in helping not only identify the learning loss, but really to close the gaps that may have occurred during closure.
Thank you both.
Okay, so jumping in the assessment side of things, as Dr. Fessler just mentioned and Dr. Robinson spoke to, this whole idea of formative assessments. And I guess the best way I can describe formative assessment, that's assessment and analysis of student learning as you move through instruction. In a perfect world, you could actually have a pre-test and a post-test connected to instruction and see what growth kids have and what was missing. Sometimes that works in small chunks, sometimes in larger chunks, but we're really focused on getting more to that formative side of assessments. We have some common standards-based formative assessments we've utilized in reading and math, and especially in writing, that have helped us along that path, but we really see the need to enhance that piece. Have seen some great opportunities through these different structures that are out there. The iReady piece actually has something called a standards mastery assessment. So when Nicole talked about those learning targets in math, we can tie those to standards and then assess them and see what kind of progress kids made from the start of an instruction in that learning experience to the end. And that's really our ultimate goal, to do that across the board, especially in reading and math. So the system is building upon that. We really need those targets. And we need to be able to align it and assess. It's difficult to develop those assessments on the fly, or just to say across a school district with 15 schools, well, here they are. Because we need to include staff in that piece and as part of that process. But these tools that are out there, these systems like iReady or potentially iStation, I think it is, could help guide that process, make it much more efficient, and get that data into staff's hands in a more effective or efficient manner. So that's been a discussion the last few years on the formative side. We'll continue to build on that. And ultimately the goal is so teachers can really improve that instructional side for kids. A big part of that formative also will help support that win structure that we've talked about that was just mentioned. And then secondly, or item D, fourthly, the reality is we're going to try to continue to really build on this big picture assessment structure that was put in place the last few years. Branching minds, getting data into a nice, awesome database to allow the MTSS process to really roll out for individual students, getting our data in one place to really look at that, and then our MIDAS system to really look at the organizational data to see what kind of progress as a system we're making. In 2/3 of a year, I believe we made unbelievable progress in the use, capacity, understanding of those systems. They really allow us to get our data into one place, so we're not using our time to find data, we've got it. Now we can use it to really determine big picture next steps down to the individual child next steps. So that will continue probably for the full 5 years. That letter D will be on this system as we build capacity around that. Any questions?
Yeah, Tom, it's Janice. I
Yeah.
do have a question. You have been talking about formative, but then you end up mixing in testing, summative testing. So I'm not really clear on what the strategy is for formative and summative. I mean, it's one thing to do formative, but if the kids aren't moving ahead, we need to know that so that teachers can go loop back and help them.
Yeah, and I apologize if I confused that item a little bit. When I was speaking, all those components of the formative piece, especially with some of these I-ready components, when we can get it down to individual units of instruction, we really do look at that as a formative type process. It's also, though, your point is a good one, that when you look at a unit, you can say it's a summative assessment of that unit. Because it's so tied to those targets and those skills, that's where I really look at it or try to explain it as a formative process. And that's the piece we're kind of trying to go backwards, more down to the classroom level and provide that data or information based on where the kids are at. Another component, I think I've mentioned it earlier, is that diagnostic. So where are kids at with skills on this diagnostic piece? And I believe some of these systems, literally every month, you can reduce a subset of that diagnostic to see how they're building on their skills. So that's, again, a formative piece that teachers could use on a day-to-day basis. But you're right, there's a summative component to that when you talk about either benchmarking or units and things like that.
Well, there's got to be. I mean, if we're worried about whether kids are achieving mastery, then they have to be tested. So I guess the language that is a little bit confusing, because it's not being, it's not the way, it's a different way of looking at it as far as the language than, what I'm used to in, say, research settings, where summative would be the how are they and the outcome.
I think the explanation was confusing. I think the language is solid in our system, Janice, that we have a continuum of assessment, but we think we have a lot more of the summative assessment than we do the formative, and those are the gaps that we want to try to.
I see. Okay.
Address, is that we need to on a daily basis understand what our kids can or cannot do and plan accordingly to support the needs of our students. So we have a lot of summative in place now. We're trying to really beef up. And some schools are actually amazing at it. So, and grade levels across our school district, but we feel, and I think this is where Tom was talking about the systematic approach, that systematically we've got to do a better job of creating common formative assessment across our classrooms, grade levels, and schools, so we can look at that micro data to direct daily instruction, weekly practices, and plan accordingly. But I would say that we have much more summative in place than we do the formative, the pre-assessment, and things of that nature. So those are the one area of focus for this summer and even into the fall, as we try to get better at using our little data to understand our bigger data.
I see. Thank you for clarifying that.
Any other questions with the instructional piece? Again, I would ask that, between now and I think our next board meeting is in only 2 weeks, that, if you have thoughts and ideas of what seems most important, we'll bring a more detailed approach back. Like Tom has already developed a continuum of assessments, to Janice's point, that I think will provide a little more clarity. We're still trying to plug a couple of holes with some of the formative pieces in that, but we'll have that ready and share some more artifacts and details as we talk about areas of focus at our next meeting. But again, in the meantime, any questions that you might have, ideas and or suggestions, feel free to, again, review this and send that information to me, and I can discuss it with the SLT.
I guess the one thing that I would maybe where I'm confused is that I don't see because I'm outside the loop, of course, and I wouldn't expect to see it all, but how the formative and the summative or the different stages, work together. So for example, some sort of sequence
Okay.
across time for each area.
Yeah, so bring back an example of what that would look like across a content area. So from pre-assessment to summative to benchmarking. Tom, is that possible to share?
Yeah, I understand the question. Yes, I think we can pull that together.
All right, cool.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
Yeah, to see it would provide clarity. I agree.
And I guess the other point I would just add in this area, I guess I'm not so much a suggestion, but I guess just a comment is, I feel like it's this very tricky balance for me in assessment that I feel like the danger in honing in deeply on assessment becomes like, do we teach to the test? Which is something I think this district has done a great job of saying, we don't do that. We care about like educating the whole child. And so I really do, at least personally, see these learning targets as being integrally tied to our assessment, because if we're also going to say there's certain basic critical knowledge we need our students to obtain independent of what standardized tests might look like, my concern, I guess, as both a parent and a school board member is, are we giving that foundation? And I would hope as a byproduct of that, that would show up in our state assessments, right? But like, to me, that link between the learning targets and our assessments is critical, because I want to have the confidence when I look at the data as a school board member that it's telling me the kids are getting the foundation they need.
I think the work that our curriculum committee has done, our teachers, leaders, and parents over the last year to year and a half has really improved that balance of, that more modern application-based learning, and now bringing back a balance of that traditional practice, skill-based, with even some, rote applications in there. So again, as we finalize over the course of this next year, those additional resources, I think we're going to have a great balance of that, traditional piece, but also still maintaining our goal to develop passionate learners, self-directed lifelong learners that can apply the skill, knowledge, and content. So again, I think we've learned a lot of great lessons over the years, and that's one of the best lessons is that balance of those two.
To Courtney's point, I think it's really important, as you pointed out, but to make explicit in the discussion about it that we are looking at formative assessments and summative assessments that do evaluate those critical aspects, the bigger picture. How does a kid approach a certain problem? There may not be, that they have to be tested, or that has to be looked at, so that we know that we're not sending a message that we only care about how fast they can multiply, which we don't care about how fast they can multiply, but we don't want to set the wrong expectations so that teachers and others focus on the wrong things.
Can I just give my little 2 cents worth here? In the past, this district put a great deal of importance on the Iowa tests of basic skills and the criterion reference tests. Those both do the kind of things that Courtney and Janice have been talking about. I have no problems with anything that's in here. I think it's very good. However, I think it's much too long. I would like to see it pared down and be more specific to some of the things that the girls have just mentioned. I want people to be able to say they will do this, this, and this, like our goals and visions and mission and so forth in the past have been much more pared down and specific. I think everything on here is great, but I think we can get rid of some of the extra words and have a formative strategic plan and goals that are much more specific to what we want.
Mardell, thank you. Please don't call me a girl. Thank you.
Okay, sounds like we can move on to goal.
Okay, so for goal 2, we have the inclusive learning environment. And we are going to talk through several of the points that I think will be most dynamic over the coming years. But first, I want to just take a moment and talk about what that means to have an inclusive learning environment. So our learning environments are inclusive when we can differentiate to a level that meets each and every student's diverse learning needs. And they are inclusive when we see our differences as strengths and we utilize those differences in our instruction. And so the 3 items that will be prioritized over the next several years really work to do those 2 things, to help us differentiate that instruction for each and every student and to make sure that our differences are strengths that are utilized for the betterment of our classroom climates. So first and foremost, let's talk about the differentiation of instruction in point A. You've just heard Nicole and Tom speak to the goal 1, student growth and achievement outcomes, and where we want to go with our assessment structures and our instructional practices. Well, our multi-tiered system of support is a framework that supports those things. And so by nature, having multiple tiers of instruction allow us to differentiate. We need to also within those tiers differentiate to a very high level. So we know as students return, we're going to need significant differentiation, and going forward we will. What we want to do within the coming years is really take a look at how we use our MTSS structures, processes, times, meetings, to make sure that we are focused in on that formative assessment process. And we are really supporting our staff in making data-based decisions for instruction using that assessment system. So as we make those changes in goal 1 to refine and enhance, we want to pair that with a use of our MTSS time and process to help carry that out for staff. So this will be about creating habits of using that data from those assessments systematically, discussing them, looking for things that are similar or different between student results, grouping students appropriately, and what that may look like is that win time, what I need, making sure that we have carved out time for students in addition to the time that's already in their daily schedule for small group instruction, individualized instruction, for enrichment and acceleration, to make sure that we are truly looking at the diversity of a class and meeting each child's unique learning needs. So that's the first piece here. Secondly, we want to continue what has been a very strong focus on student belonging, safety, social justice, anti-racism education. These components are something that, as I stated before, we have been working on. We know we need to take a stronger approach to them. So Ashley is leading a subcommittee right now, and they're beginning to map out how we can achieve things like equity audits within our schools, how we can approach professional learning to move towards anti-racism education in addition to our social awareness education that already happens within SEL, and make sure that our adults are really looking internally before they are teaching externally when we're talking about personal bias, when we're talking about racism in the United States. And that's in addition to looking at our social studies curriculum and changes that are coming per state requirements. So there are many, many pieces to that. What we see as the very next step is starting to draft those long-term plans and what we want to achieve over several years with lots of voice from our staff as well. So that is the kind of second component here. So we have our multi-tiered system of support, supporting the formative assessments and use of data to drive instruction. And we have our very strong focus on student belonging and social justice. So finally, point C is really about making sure that we are along the same lines, utilizing multiple data points and assessment procedures in an effective way to determine special education eligibility, to design services that meet the very unique needs of our students with IEPs and 504 plans, and to make sure that our practices are absolutely as inclusionary as possible. And when we talk about inclusion of students with disabilities, we're not talking about a time of day We're not talking about when two groups come together. We're talking about shifting our mindset as to what can this child do and where can that fit appropriately and how do we enhance those practices. So we've got some work to do in those areas, but if we are really moving towards that inclusive learning environment, we see those as the three biggest ideas and priorities over the next few years.
Katie, this is Janice. I want to go back to item B for a quick minute.
Sure.
And just say that I am very, very grateful and very committed, as you know, to social justice, social equity, and making our schools as strong and supportive of all our students as we possibly can. And I want to thank you for your leadership in this. And I look forward to hearing more about your plans for the future, because the time could not be better to address this. And I know we've always done it, but really now to talk explicitly about these very important issues, to expose for people what their biases look like and why they need to question them, is so important at all levels, even at our, with our older students.
Right. And to speak to that, I've had some conversations recently with colleagues in other areas that really jumped right into anti-racism education, even in remote learning this past spring. And now we're taking a huge step back to say, we really have to do the adult work first. We really have to understand our own personal biases before we jump into it with students. And so that's something this committee is working through, is how do we really make sure that we're providing effective professional learning structures prior to jumping into it in the classroom, because we want to make sure we're very well equipped to have those conversations with students so that they can be supported.
Absolutely. Thank you again. I'm really excited to see where this goes.
Any other questions for Goal 2? Okay, thank you.
All right, so for goal 3, these sub-goals stay largely the same, but it's the context in which we apply them that changes quite a bit. So following reopening, building the parent understanding of how to support student growth and learning, that becomes as important as ever when we're emerging into a different context. So how can parents help support their kids in a lot of ways, like Katie just mentioned, in a lot of ways that we heard earlier tonight, as kids perhaps could grow and develop gaps in their learning. What does that look like to support them from a parent perspective? What resources can we give parents? What supports can we give them? So helping them continue to understand this next year, and even the result of the spring, what we're looking ahead, for the experience that they're going to have for this year. What does that look like for support for our parents specifically? For B is interesting because the community, this is really focused on the community partnership. Over the spring, the community partnership focus shifted to the support the community provided for us, which was tremendous. And we highlighted this in the mailed newsletter that we just sent out, that is reaching homes this past week and continues to be delivered. But we talk about just how amazing the support was of our community, for our students, for our families in need. It was really tremendous. So we're continuing to build on that level of support from our community, but also as we're able to re-engage in some of the projects of allowing students to do service learning projects and understanding what life is like in the community, and continuing to articulate and collaborate with our high schools. Again, these look different in the present reality than they would have a year ago from now. And so it's that context that matters. And finally, C is continue to connect with all of our audiences. This is both internal and external, to help people stay updated. And again, it's a repeated refrain, but obviously it's more important now than ever to continue to have people stay updated on the planning that we're doing, on the progress we're making, and what these decisions mean for our kids and for our families for this upcoming year. So continuing to increase that public awareness of decisions that are made. And as I mentioned earlier, it's that frequency that people can rely on and can trust that we're going to continue to receive updates, and we know it's going to be reliable, and we know it's going to be something that we just continue to expect moving forward. And hopefully we're building off a strong foundation that we have built over the last several years for that, which makes it, that much more effective for us to communicate and connect externally. So I don't know if there's any questions about this particular piece.
Ben, yeah, this is Janice.
Yep.
Can you hear me okay? I'm getting a lot of,
Yep, I can hear you.
okay. I have to keep turning off my video to get a good enough signal.
Yeah.
I think in particular, the work that gets done in support of A is going to be probably the most critical work that the district can focus on right now, because I think it's a good time to really jump in and have dialogues with parents and understand really what their needs are, push out more things to them, yes, but then take more time to hear about what works well and what doesn't, and then adjust as accordingly.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited about that work.
Excellent.
All right, the next one is going to start with me. This is Ross from Human Resources, Goal 4. And as you remember from the process, this was really connecting the previous Goal 4 and Goal 5 under one umbrella, which I'm very excited about, because that's actually naturally happened over the last few years in terms of aligning our fiscal resources with our human capital. And so item A in particular, ensuring that all students have equity in access to all things, curriculum, resources, staffing, facilities. And as we heard in Goal 2 and Goal 1 about how those programs are evolving, what types of resources are they going to need to make that work happen? Our distribution of staff isn't every building gets one staff member for one thing. It's based now on student need. It's based on how many students we have in the building. Even in our current staffing work that we went into this summer, just fresh off of this strategic planning, we really took a different approach, not a different, but an approach with an added layer of the specialized programs and student needs and how that could impact staffing, whether that's if we didn't have enough staff to fill certain positions, where did we put those staff members to support our neediest students? We look at facility, all of those items, and that's in conjunction with the instruction department. It's pretty terrific work. So I'm excited to see where that will go over the next 5 years. Item B, I'm just so proud of us for having this goal so clearly put in place. Mrs. Prinsky, you just said the timing of this is special, and that is absolutely the case. For our community to say that we need to attract and develop, of course, high quality, amazing staff, but staff that represent the students in our classrooms and their families and their needs is pretty special. So as Katie said, in terms of an audit process to look at our current programming, a similar approach will happen in our hiring process in terms of what partnerships do we have in place so that we're able to attract a variety of different people to our positions so that we can hit the mark of getting not just the best, but also culturally diverse staff so that we're richer as an organization. We've also gotten some work started there. The instruction department has been very helpful in terms of strengthening partnerships with some universities so we can start getting some student teachers in from different programming pieces and starting to also build some experts from within. But that will also be some exciting work ahead. And for the last item, number C, I will turn it over to Vicki to speak a little bit about the next steps that has been happening since fourth quarter.
So one of the things that moving forward is continuing to work collaboratively with the different committees, the finance committee, the facilities committee, the safety committee, so that we have the opportunity to discuss opportunities and challenges to ensure that the resources are being allocated correctly to meet the goals and needs of the district, whether that be on a short-term basis as we look at finalizing our master facilities plan and discussing how that plan will be funded, whether it be having joint meetings between the finance and facilities committee so that, again, we can have a collaborative approach to discussing and planning as we go forward. But not only that, moving forward, we're beginning to have discussions in regard to sharing our information better in regard to financial information, telling our story better from a communication standpoint to make sure that we're transparent, but also that we have a clear message, an understandable message of where we're at as a district, looking at different data points that we can share periodically to share where we're at a financial situation, rather than just continue, to have a bunch of reports that maybe are not as easily understood as they could be. So we're already beginning that process. We're continuing that process, and looking at what we can do to better plan and make sure that those resources are allocated to meet the goals of the district. Any questions for Ross or I?
Randy? Randy, you're on mute.
All right, let me start over. So Vicki, I want to say thank you for all your years of service. As you guys should know, Vicki is retiring on end of day Tuesday. She's looking forward to waking up and not reading her email on Wednesday morning, especially probably for me. But congratulations, Vicki, on your retirement, and thank you for all that you've done.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Nice.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. I appreciate your friendship, and I certainly look forward to you having a wonderful future.
Yeah, me too. I have a comment on that. What happened? We restarted the whole thing. I have a comment for Ross about really continuing to focus on diversity of hiring. I know how difficult that is and has been. I know the district has always tried to do that, but to double down and really make even a stronger effort is so critical. I mean, we know from research that, especially little Black boys do so much better in life and have higher graduation rates if they have a Black teacher, even just one. So, anything that we can do. And so I'm really basically applauding your efforts because I think it's so critical. And I know we share that goal and understanding about how important it is.
I appreciate that. And we do a tremendous job of hiring great people. Our staff is evidence of that, but I think there are tremendous opportunities for us to broaden our candidate pool and to strengthen new relationships to make it an even more culturally rich organization and place to work. So I'm very excited about that work ahead.
Me too. Thank you so much.
So this is Courtney. I just want to second that comment because completely agree, and I'm grateful for all you are doing in that area and will continue to do. I actually have a comment that is piggybacking off of an idea of Chris's, so I will let him say more and give him credit for this idea, but it came up in some of our discussions, and I think Chris brought such a perspective of fresh eyes to the board about the idea of having some kind of high-level dashboard of key metrics about the district. And it's not exclusively for the financial area. It could span over into demographics, assessment, but a sort of high-level dashboard that we could come back to and would become part of regular reporting to the board. And I think some of it, again, might be in this stewardship of resources area when it comes to the state of the district's finances. But I just loved this idea because I think it would allow us as a board and the community to see things at a very high level. And if we were to repeat that same sort of set of information, it gives consistency and a sense of where we're going up and where we're going down. So I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything to what I said, but I just wanted to sort of
Thanks, Courtney. So we put I think I put something together last week or 2 weeks ago, just a draft item. The easiest way to look at it is the quarterly newsletter was sitting in my mailbox on Friday, and it's the bifold, four pages, and it's a great piece of information that has to be read. But even that piece of there could be an eighth of a page or a quarter of a page dedicated to just easy numbers for everyone in the community, parents, students, community members, whoever's involved, and all these different, even in this forum, we're sitting here as a board. There's enough data that we have, and if we can kind of come to an agreement, whether it's at the building level or at the grade level or financial or utilization, at any number or any data point, there's definitely a dashboard that could be created from top down, and we can just pinpoint to wherever we want to go and highlight issues or celebrate, as well as celebrate successes both ways and track that metric. So I'm sure we can provide that to everyone here afterwards.
I think, this is Janice again, I think the goal has always been to move towards a dashboard, and perhaps maybe what needs to be done is and the next level of specificity, assuming that the board and the district agree with this high level, and I'm assuming we're taking that next step because that's what we did last year, would then appear in the next level of detail from the reporting that we get. And so I think that is very critical to have that explicitly stated at some point as a goal, because I know it is anyway, but to really focus on it. Would that be fair to say, Tom?
Yeah, actually, a key component of the strategic plan process was to develop these key performance indicators, KPIs, which aligns right to that. What are those key things you want to measure, report, and share out over time with your community, with your board, with your leadership, with your staff? Dr. Fessler and I attended a whole couple days training connected to developing that dashboard. There's a lot of great examples out there. I'm sure there's a great one that you developed. So I think it's part of that process that we've already identified, and just have to move through those next steps and ID what is it you want on that dashboard.
Right. Thank you, Tom, for reminding us, because now that you brought it up, I'm a little embarrassed to have forgotten. It seems so long ago that we did the strategic plan.
It's a very long time ago, considering all that's happened between March and today. So absolutely.
Thanks for letting me off the hook. And I look forward to, getting to the point where we do have that dashboard, because I think it'll be very instructive and helpful for everyone.
So next steps is that at the next meeting, we'll bring back any additional feedback that you guys have. If there are things that you think are top priorities from your perspective, if you would email those to me in the next several days. Keep in mind that we've got to post the agenda for the next board meeting the following Friday or so, right in that area. So we've got about a week and a half to really digest this from your perspective. If you have thoughts or ideas, send them to us. We've been having conversations pretty regularly about the work, so we're ready to bring to the board what we think is the most pressing and important areas that we need to address as a district, but absolutely want your feedback as well. As Tom indicated, the training that we went to was hosted by CEC, so is part of their strategic planning process. So they have a dashboard. In the meantime, I'll actually get something from Perry, some type of an example, and share that with the full board so you can see what they're talking about. But again, as Tom had mentioned, you identify your key performance indicators and you work around that. I think we have some flexibility in terms of other KPIs. We're developing our own KPIs, whether it's in the strategic plan or pulling some other things, some proud points, in terms of our graduation rates or some of the other cool things that we've accomplished, and including them as well. So I'll get a little feedback based on that group, and I'll try to send you an example of what they have packaged, and again, the flexibility within that.
That's great, Art. I'm looking forward to getting that.
Okay, returning to our agenda, excuse me for 1 second. So we do have a couple of action items that we need to have addressed today, mostly to address some of the issues related to COVID and spendings. And Vicki has put together the following action items that we'd like to ask the board to take action on this evening. So Vicki, I don't know if you'd like to provide a little bit of.
So this resolution will allow us to purchase PPE equipment outside the bidding parameters. As mentioned before, one of the options we do have is to work with CMS through the state, and then we would be exempt from bidding those particular items. But as we look at the competitive market right now, they may not be the best option for the cost for these items. So this will allow us to spend up to $200,000 for PPE equipment without going through the bid process. Because if we were to do that, we don't think that we would be able to get that process completed in time to get those items in our hands. So for the start of, supplying that for students and staff. So this is what we're recommending.
Okay, that's really great. Does anybody have any other questions about it before I ask for a motion?
Hey, Vic, yeah, you said 400,000, or it says $200,000 in the proposal, not to exceed $200,000.
Right, it's in the let it be resolved portion.
Yeah. But you were saying $400,000, weren't you?
I'm sorry, 200,000.
No, I heard her say 200.
Okay, I'm sorry if I misunderstood
Doesn't
that.
matter. Doesn't matter. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion on this one. This is Robert. Be it resolved that on the 29th day of June 2020, the Community Consolidated School District 59 Board of Education approves the expenditure of funds in the amount not to exceed $200,000 for the purchase of personal protective equipment on an emergency basis in order to acquire the personal protective equipment needed for the anticipated reopening of schools beginning in July 2020.
Okay, do we have a second?
I can second.
Okay, Randy seconds. Roll call, please.
All right. Garlowitz,
Aye.
Lang,
Aye.
Mencia,
Aye.
Petrielli, aye. Reed,
Aye.
Schumacher,
Aye.
and Krinsky.
Aye.
And the motion passes.
All right, thank you. We had talked about 5.02, approval of memo of understanding about surplus vacation days in the past. So this is coming before us for action for both ESPs in this first motion and Cameo in the second. Are there any questions? Okay, hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve 5.02?
This is Courtney. I can make the motion. Whereas the Memorandum of Understanding represents an agreement between the CCSD59 Board of Education and the District 59 Education Association regarding additional usage options for 12-month ESP staff who have surplus vacation days due to COVID-19, as defined in the attached Memorandum of Understanding. Therefore, be it resolved that on the 29th day of June 2020, the Board of Education approves the Memorandum of Understanding, Association President paid release time. This MOU will be effective upon approval of the Board of Education and expire September 1st, 2020.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, roll call, please.
Okay, Lang,
Aye.
Mencia,
Aye.
Petrielli, aye. Reed, Randy.
Am I muted? Did I get? No, I said aye.
Oh, I didn't hear you.
Either.
Schumacher,
Aye.
Krinsky,
Aye.
and Garlowitz.
Aye.
And the motion passes.
All right, thank you. Now we need a motion for 5.03.
I'll take that one. Whereas the memorandum of understanding represents an agreement between the Community Consolidated School District 59 Board of Education and the District 59 Education Association regarding additional usage options for Cameo staff who have surplus vacation days due to COVID-19, as defined in the attached memorandum of understanding. Therefore, it be resolved that the 29th day of June 2020, the Board of Education approves the memorandum of understanding, association paid president paid release time. This MOU will be effective upon approval of the Board of Education and expire September 1, 2020.
Okay, do we have a second?
This is Chris. I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mancia,
Aye.
Petrielli, aye. Reed,
Aye.
Schumacher,
Aye.
Krinsky,
Aye.
Garlowitz,
Aye.
and Lang.
Aye.
And the motion passes.
All right, thank you, everybody. So now at this point, we had two things come up. First of all, Art, do you want to take it away?
Yes, we'd like to take this opportunity and Randy, thank you for setting the stage. But as Randy mentioned a little earlier, one of our superintendent leadership team members, Vicki Nissen, is retiring. She has only a couple of days left, but man, we have really milked every ounce out of her we can. I think Randy scheduled a 3:30 facilities committee and finance committee meeting last night, or for tomorrow night on her last day. So we're really getting a great deal in terms of her service and every ounce of it. So Vicki, thank you for your endurance through this. But earlier in the week, or last week, I'm sorry, we had a great celebration with our SLT, and Ross is a creative genius, developed a slideshow, and yeah, Vicki really loved it, as you can tell by her expression and reaction. But I've asked Ross if he would just share a few of the highlight slides that we used to celebrate Vicki's retirement with the Board of Education and those viewing. So Ross, if you would take it away, I would greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely. Let me see if I can share my screen.
Dr. Fester, you'll have to stop sharing before Ross can. There you go. Now Ross should be able to.
Okay, let me see. Okay. All right. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Yes.
So we had to think creatively, working via screens via Zoom to try to honor Vicki. And if you don't know this, Vicki is like the best party planner of the bunch. So we did the best we could. We got a real cheesy PowerPoint template to highlight the longest title in the district. She did not know that this was going to happen. And, we started making assumptions. It all started actually in 1959. That is when the bean counter was born. And then she joined 59 in 2014. She actually turned 59 in 59. I don't know if that's where Ben got the title 59 and 59, but Vicki lived it. And then now in 2020, she's retiring from 59. So you can make the assumption it was always meant to be that Vicki would be a 59er. And we're so glad she was. And then Maureen, who is a master at finding games to enjoy with teams. We did a team Mad Lib. And if you're not familiar with what a Mad Lib is, they were around when I was a kid. Someone would give you a topic like Vicki's retirement from District 59. And then they would ask you for adjectives and events and verbs ending in ing. So we gave these to everyone on SLT. And then I collected them and we built out a Mad Lib paragraph. So I've made one that kind of captures a little bit from everybody. And it sounds like this. Dear Vicki, this school year has been quite spectacular. As it comes to an end and you prepare for your retirement, we want to share some memories and wishes. We will never forget our jubilant SLT meetings. If our meetings had a theme song, it would be Don't Stop Believin' by Journey. We will always remember all of the impeccable times we had with you in CCSD59. And we will be sure to think of you during Muffin Tin Lunch, which is kind of an inside joke of one of her amazing team building parties that she would plan every year. You will be remembered as the vital team member who always skipped. Vicki, if we were able to give you some advice for your retirement, it would be to care and travel. In your retirement, be sure to pick your favorite things to do, like selling, sleeping, or shaking. Then make sure to do that thing each and every day. Vicki, may your retirement be filled with relaxation, coffee, and money. All of our best wishes to you, as we will be missing you in District 59. So we went through a few of those and we had to guess who it was, and it was pretty fun. Now finance people, as you know, they love a good chart. So I prepared a chart with some data. This is the average time of a board presentation per SLT member. But I then forgot that I didn't include the annual budget presentation. And that just took it off the charts. So when we factored in that data, Vicki once again was ahead of all of us. Nice job, Vicki. I also went back into the system. Vicki was not hired while I was in HR. So I was curious what her references said. So I wanted to check up on those, even though she only had like a week left. And these are some of the things I pulled out of there. Ms. Nissen is a knowledgeable and strong team member. She's a team player and lifelong learner. Her knowledge and intellectual savvy in the area of school finance and the economy have proven to be beneficial as we usher in changes for the next fiscal year. She exemplifies the characteristics of a high quality leader. And all of those absolutely rang true in our experiences with Vicki. So I thought that was good evidence of our successful hiring process. But nice job, Vicki. Then we had another game. And this game is called Famous People Equal Financial Terms. And I'm going to let you play this tonight. So the first one to shout it out wins. There's not a prize, but you can feel very, very proud of yourself. Here we go. Famous people that equal a financial term. What financial term would come from this famous person? Come on. Oh, yeah, Dr. Fessler. What's the term?
Bond, James Bond.
Bond, James Bond.
I said it in my head. I didn't even make the connection. Hello, Bond.
Come on. Nice job, Dr. Fessler. Come on. Come on. All right.
I know that one.
I'm not going on Moneypenny.
All right. That would have been a good one too. Okay. I really like this next one. Here we go. Let's see how we do. This one's a little harder.
Levy.
Yes. Was that his name? Nice. Eugene Levy. That's right. Very nicely done. All right. Now this next one's easy, but it's just so great.
Cash.
You may think you're cool, but you'll never be as cool as Johnny Cash. Yep, absolutely. So that was just a little fun game we played. And then we ended with this, just a little summary of some of the things I was remembering that Vicki was a tremendous part of. From the launch of full day kindergarten in our district, to hiring assistant principals for every building, instructional coaches, other supports, building the ELC, getting all students technology devices, enhancing partnerships, especially with District 214, to innovating negotiated salary schedules, to building the new ad center, to absorbing the facilities and operations department, to planning staff gatherings, all while maintaining a AAA bond rating and a certificate of excellence from AASBO. Your service was priceless. And that's enough work to fill a good 35-year plus career. And I think she did that in a solid 6.5, 7. So Vicki, congratulations. Thank you so much for your service to District 59. We will miss you, but we hope to stay in touch as we move forward and hear all about your wonderful retirement.
Thank you again so much. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki.
Yeah, Vicki, I am so excited about everything that you've done for the district, and I know we're going to miss you. I think you've, had to steer us through some very challenging times, and you did it with your strength and your your, I don't know, just your ability to manage through those times and be strong and stay on course and get us through everything. So thank you. It's been tough. We'll miss you. And you survived it. You're walking out on your own 2 feet. That's a big plus.
Thank you again. I'm going to miss everyone here. This is my family.
You're right.
You're welcome.
You're right, Vicki.
Vicki, I'll still be calling you each day, so don't worry too much about it. I still got a lot to learn from you. So once again, thank you for everything.
You'll have to visit if we ever get to meet in person.
That's right.
I have one more item. There isn't a new and old business on the agenda, but I thought that it would be a good thing if we acknowledged Laura Murphy for her leadership. She's in the Illinois Senate. She was the one who had heard from me about the problems of not having access to libraries. And she remembered that. And so when this young man who graduated from Elk Grove High came up to her and met with her and said, we need to do something about this, she ran with it. And she made it happen. And so all our students in unincorporated areas, if they're low income, can get a free library card. So I really think that that's been something that's bothered our district for a very long time. In fact, I don't know why we didn't think to go to our elected representatives ourselves to say, what can you do? But it's done now. So I thought not only should we give her some sort of award of recognition because it is such a significant thing, but maybe it's time to think about creating an annual award for a community member. And this would be the first annual award. And so that would be a way to honor any number of people in the community who have really given something of themselves to District 59. So I was wondering what the rest of you think.
Janice, this is Courtney. I agree. I would love to recognize her in some way. I guess I don't have enough experience on the board to know what would be the appropriate recognition. But I agree that it was like a really important step, and it gets just my mind churning with communications committee, thinking about how we spread the word about this, because it's not useful if people don't know about it, and it's such a great opportunity. So I will footnote that myself to bring up in a communications meeting and just think about how we share it with our students.
Good. We need to make, the only thing we need to do is make sure that the governor has actually signed it.
He did.
So, he did?
Yeah.
All right. So I was thinking that what we've done in the past, and the district and the foundation actually had an award for to recognize community members, and that's gone by the wayside at the moment. But create like a plaque that would have the district's logo on it, and say something, give it a name, a community recognition award or something. And, we could then use that same template annually to give some sort of plaque to the person who won it. And so
Janice, can I speak?
Of course.
I don't know that it's necessary to do this on an annual basis, but I do think that it is something that's been done in the past. And I think it's nice to recognize somebody when somebody does something outstanding. I received the Citizen of the Year award from District 59 prior to my coming onto the board as a district member when I was so active at Grove Junior High. So it has been done before because I received it. And perhaps something like that could be given to her, the Citizen of the Year. And it wouldn't necessarily have to be an annual, but it could be done whenever there's a real need to recognize somebody.
I think the only reason I said annual doesn't mean you would have to do it for sure if you didn't have anyone to recognize, but at least it would put it on your, in your awareness so that as it came up, you'd be able to act accordingly.
Or even taking the step of, in addition to our state senator, but also the young man that helped, get it across, who was an alumni of our schools. And it'd be important for the students that are in our schools today to see someone that possibly looks like them, that walked through the same hallways as them, making these types of significant changes.
That is such a good point. I love that.
I
So
like
maybe
that idea a lot, Robert.
Thank you. We can get him before he goes to Harvard this fall.
There you go.
And perhaps Courtney's point was well taken, that it could be handled through the communication committee.
I think that's a great idea. And so is that something, Art, that you and your staff can?
Yep, I'll have Ben work on a design and we'll get something put together. We have a company, I've already talked to Denise about it. We have a company that we regularly use. So we'll design something and recognize both the senator and the student.
I think it's very nice, and I must admit that I've never forgotten that award that I received from District 59, and I had no anticipation that I would ever receive anything like that. So it is wonderful to recognize people.
I agree, Mardell, because I got the Hearts of Gold Award in Arlington Heights as a volunteer, and Art did it, and I was so surprised. And
I was there for that award.
Right, and I can see it. It's right in front of me on my shelf.
Yeah,
it's something that does have, an effect. And I have a shining star from NSSEO from 2018, and that's also on my desk. So I think it really is meaningful, and I think to do that would be a good thing. So thank you.
One thing I find is kind of interesting is, like, I recognize these people, but then putting it somewhere in the ad building as well, like kind of like, hey, these are almost like previous winners kind of thing too. So their names are continually recognized as part of the, in the district. We give them the award, they get the recognition, but then it's a reminder to us, hey, we've had people do some great things for this district.
well said. And it's true, because there's always something good going on by somebody.
I'm sorry, things are really breaking up for me, so I'm not sure what I'm talking over someone or not. If I have, I apologize. I like Randy's idea also to have, a plaque saying, these are the honorees, and then the years with the name. So I think that's a nice thing too. So we could consider that.
All right, we'll go to work on the plaques, and then it sounds like there was also a suggestion that the communications team would work out some of those other details. So maybe you guys could make some recommendations for the wall of fame or the wall of whatever we would like to acknowledge that to be.
Yeah, you say wall of fame, and all I can think is wall of shame. So sorry about that, but made me laugh.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Is there anything else before we make a motion to go into closed?
That's all that we have.
Well, what you had was pretty meaty, so thank you for that. And
appreciate the format. It was nice to have a good chunk of time to really work through all this stuff, digest, and really hear the thoughts and the questions of the board members. So thank you for your feedback.
Thank you for everybody being here. So Vicki, bon voyage, keep in touch. Tell us what great stuff you're up to. I want to know. And have a wonderful, wonderful time.
Bye, Vicki.
Okay, everybody. So I need a motion to go into closed session.
Be it resolved that on the 29th day of June 2020, the Community Consolidated School District 59 Board of Education recess in a closed meeting for discussion of the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the district, 5, etc.
Do we have a second?
Robert will second that one.
All right, thank you. Second by Robert. Roll call, please.
Hang
Patty
on.
might be on mute. There we go.
I was on mute. I think I was asking, it's like, Robert, is that you? Okay. Petrielli, aye. Reed,
Aye.
Schumacher,
Aye.
Prinsky,
Aye.
Horowitz, Chris,
Aye.
Lang,
Aye.
and Mencia.
Aye.
And we are in close.